I'm really glad all of you have joined us today for the Passport to Healthy Living Clean Cooking Program with Sue Balcom. We're just thrilled to connect with her in her kitchen. She lives in Mandan on the other side of the river from us, but feels nice and close here on the screen. For more than 60 years, AARP has been working to improve the lives and empower those 50 plus to live their best lives. Clean cooking with natural ingredients contributes to healthy living, and simplifying our foods is a step in the right direction to that healthy living and healthy aging. And now let's say hello to Sue Balcom, also known as Root Cellar Sue. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Doreen. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, many of us have seen and heard you over the years on Prairie Public, and it's just really fun to have you with us today. You're an author, a blogger, a farmer's marketer, and a self-described breadhead. So, Sue, you are a busy person. Every time I talk to you, you've got 100 things going on. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I was going to tell you guys to get out your cleaning supplies since you have your aprons on, but I don't think that's the clean cooking we're talking about at the moment. Hey, look, she's prepared. Yay! The B in my name, Sue Balcom, has to stand for bread because it's just something that I am in love with. I experiment. I sell bread at the farmer's market. I teach a lot of dough classes because that's my German heritage. So I have tons and tons of information. Like I wouldn't even have to demonstrate any recipes today because I have so much information about clean food. But I want you guys to have these recipes. So if you have any other questions, we have some resources on clean food from AARP, from Mayo Clinic, and some other places like that. When I cook, I don't necessarily use recipes. I just kind of do intuitively. So we're going to do some time lapse here because I know you guys have all seen movies like that, right? Where we can do a whole day in 15 minutes. So I think we have to start with bread. Clean cooking has everything to do with cooking yourself and using farmer market, fresh from the garden ingredients, or as close to the farm as you possibly can. So I'm going to start out with the bread recipe, and I have to go through this quickly because we only have a limited amount of time. And I use Montana wheat organic flour for my own personal baking. I really love this stuff. So I have 4 cups of flour. This recipe is so easy, my 12-year-old granddaughter can do it. 4 cups of flour. I have 2 teaspoons of salt and 2 teaspoons of sugar. And then because this is a 3-seed bread, I toasted a 1/4 cup of sesame seeds. We're just going to throw that in there. We're going to throw in a 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds and a 1/4 cup of raw sunflower seeds. I really like seeds and nuts, and they're healthy for you. I buy those organically from Azure Standard. Because everybody wants to know these things. I'm going to just throw them out there. But if I miss something, you let me know. I buy yeast in bulk packages. So it's in a little mason jar here. So we need 2 and a little more yeast. Okay. So you will have the recipe in front of you, but it's like 4, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then a 1/4 cup of oil. So I'm going to whisk these dry ingredients together. And then I'm going to drop that oil. Oh, and by the way, if you're making any kind of bread that you don't want your oil to flavor, you don't use olive oil. That's for the squash. Use an oil that doesn't have any flavor to it, like canola or a vegetable oil. Grapeseed oil is good for no flavor added, because we want those nuts to come out. And I'll tell you, those toasted sesame seeds make this bread amazing. And it's easy. You know, like a lot of people are afraid of bread. They're afraid of kneading, I think. And that's how I stay in shape, is I need about 100 pounds of bread, flour into bread every week when I'm doing farmers markets. But if you don't like touching dough, which I just don't understand that at all you have to do is mix this up. So it's like shaggy and very wet. You can't screw this up either. I'm telling you, you just can't. So I've got all my ingredients mixed, right? So when I'm planning, you know, I plan my meals out at least 2 days in advance, if not 3. And I always try to have some basic foods in my freezer. And the concept of clean cooking has a lot to do with no preservatives and a lot less ingredients. Like if you were comparing 2 boxes of yogurt at the grocery store, and one had, you know, milk, whey, culture, and fruit in it, that would be a much cleaner choice than one that had added sweeteners or artificial flavors or things like that. Okay, so I'm gonna hopefully be able to talk and cook at the same time. I do it when I'm here by myself all the time. This has to raise for an hour and a half. So while that's raising, you could be cooking the rest of your meal. Like you could come home at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and you could have fresh bread and squash for supper by 6:30, 7 o'clock. That's how easy this is. So after it raises for an hour and a half, it's gonna look like this. Pretty amazing, huh? All like nice and puffy. And I know if you don't want to touch it, you don't have to, but I'm going to what is called deflate the bread, which means I'm pushing the air out of it. And then I'm going to, because I don't want to be washing my hands all the time while you guys are watching me, I'm going to put a rubber glove on. I use a lot of these. And I'm going to use butter, which is another clean ingredient, because there's really nothing to butter except cream and salt. And we're going to generously grease a couple of pans. These are oven-proof Pyrex that I just found that I absolutely love. They're sturdy, and if you take good care of them, will last you a lifetime, unlike plastic, which you cannot put in your oven. I have been searching for mixing bowls for a long time, and they hardly make the kind I'm looking for anymore in glass. They're all plastic. Okay, so we grease that up. Then we're going to move a few things out of the way here. Don't want to lose my yeast. We're going to dump it on the table. Scrape it out of the bowl. I really like though when it's like this, you know, it's kind of soft and it smells nice and yeasty. And then I'm going to chop it in half and just pick it up and throw it in the bowl and throw it in the bowl. And then we let it go for about 20 to 30 minutes. And if you get busy, like sometimes I don't set my little timer thing, and then I forget about things, this is one of those recipes that's very forgiving. Okay, we're going to move that over there. And then 30 minutes later, it's going to puff up to about an inch above the Pyrex bowls. I didn't have a lot of bowls, so I have to go with 1 loaf of bread instead of 2 little ones. But I really like all that buttery crust, and so that's why I like the 2 little loaves instead. It goes in the oven, 425 degrees for 15 minutes. And then we reduce the heat 375 for about 20 to 30 minutes. I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to remove my buttery glove, and I'm going to remember to set a timer. And I apologize for my backside. They did make me wear clothes under their apron. I don't know why, but there, 15 minutes. So while that's in the oven baking, I would just like to cover a couple things about, and I'm not trying to freak anybody out here, but a lot of times my sister-in-law, I overhear her saying, I'm not sure why Sue and JC aren't 400 pounds, the way Sue cooks and bakes all the time. Well, I attribute that to the fact that we eat what I would call clean. It's so important after you turn 50 to kind of change your eating habits so that you don't gain weight as you age. I think it's like 10 pounds a year. Now, I'm not talking about JC because I think he probably has it on me there with the weight gain thing. But we eat everything as close to the farm as we possibly can. Now, I realize not everybody can do that. We actually buy grass-fed beef, and I split I split a half a beef with my sister-in-law. And a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, that's so expensive. But if you take the fact that you've got steaks, you've got roasts, you've got burger, you've got round steak, you've got ribs, you can have it done up any way you want, and you divide that by the cost, the initial upfront cost, you'll find that most of your cuts of meat are actually less expensive than if you bought them in the grocery store. And the beauty of that is that I don't have to decide ahead of time what I'm going to buy for meat products at the grocery store, because we have a freezer, a big freezer, chest freezer that we keep loaded with chicken, pork, and beef from the farm. Also, most of the vegetables, everything that we're going to be putting in that squash today, the sausage comes from the Wishick Super Value store. Whenever I'm down in my hometown, well, it's kind of my hometown, I always make a stop at Stan's and pick up Wishick sausage because everybody loves it. But I saw that they had some seasoned pork sausage, so I bought that. If you have extra bread, never throw your bread away. In fact, sometimes when I'm really hungry, I'll actually cut the moldy outside off and eat the inside. But make breadcrumbs, make toast, croutons, freeze it for your stuffing for your Thanksgiving turkey. My apples come off a tree. My eggs come off a farm. With COVID, we have found that more and more people are looking to local to buy. So by doing that, by sourcing these products locally, you're eating better, more nutrient dense foods, and you're helping your local economy because you're supporting the farmers that are out there. Now, I'm going to tell you something about bread that I hope you don't find offensive. After you get a certain age, you know, pretty soon you run into the doctor a little bit more than you were because you got a little bit of extra weight, a little bit of high blood pressure. We have diabetes, onset old age diabetes when we grew up with dough food. And so I kind of watch my sugar, and we test it every time I go in for my annual physical. And I know that bread contributes to that. And I know that there's a lot of people that steer clear of bread, but one of the things I always recommend people to do is read the labels when they're in the store, especially on bread. Pepperidge Farm white bread actually has 18 ingredients in it. This bread here basically has, you know, less than 10 when you count the seeds, which are organic and good for you at the same time. But there are things in commercial foods that they don't have to really list so that you can understand them. Like, have you ever read a Diet Coke can? Like, I can't even pronounce half those words. But there's something called L-cysteine in bread that's actually a byproduct of human hair. And I tell people that, and I don't mean to like scare anybody off, because I eat bread from the store sometimes also, but that just kind of like really turns me off. There's ammonium sulfate, and there's tons of salt in store-bought bread. And salt, as you know, is bad for your blood pressure. I love to read. I love to experiment. One of the things that I just told you about ingredients in food, I got from this book called Nourishing Traditions. It's a Sally Fallon book. It was really, really, really popular when I was working in local foods about 10 or 12 years ago. And I love it. It's a beautiful book. It has wonderful recipes in, but it talks about the kinds of ingredients that you should try to avoid when you're at the grocery store. So shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, you've heard that before. On Good Friday, I like to have fish sticks and tomato soup because it kind of reminds me of the food that we ate when we were in school on Fridays when you couldn't eat meat during Lent. And so I bought a box of fish sticks. And when I brought them home and opened up the freezer to put them in, I thought to myself, this is the only box of food that's in this refrigerator or freezer that I didn't put in there myself. The meat's all wrapped in butcher paper. Everything else is sealed with a seal-a-meal kind of thing that we use for vegetables. I buy a lot of things in bulk, and Butter is one thing, of course, I don't make myself. So there was some butter in there. Oh, and bacon. We never get enough bacon when we get a hog, so I have to always buy bacon. But we don't eat a lot of preservatives. And I think that really, really, really is one of the things that helps us keep our weight down and help us keep healthy. And I'm not talking about being skinny like a model, because those days are over with for us, because gravity is our enemy when you're as old as I am. However, it does help. And the more you eat foods like this, the more you will either crave them, or you will actually be able to go out to eat or go to somebody else's house, and you'll be able to say, God, wow, this just doesn't taste the same as the food that I'm eating. Now the bread recipes, and I really, I do a lot of historical research. I do a lot of interviews with old German ladies, because even though they don't think so, they still have a lot to say. But this is the book, Bread, Toast, and Crumbs, that the bread recipes come out of. This thing is just loaded with fabulous recipes, not only for making bread, but for what to do with it when it's past its prime, which that happens. Even at our house, because the bread that we make has no preservatives in it. So while the sourdough lasts a little bit longer than breads with sugar and yeast in them, we still try to use them up one way or the other without having to throw them out. How are we doing on our bread anyway? Oh, 5 more minutes, and then we're going to reduce the heat on that. So we are going to get our squash in the oven. Let me see here now. I sure could use one of Martha's assistants at the moment. Okay, to make the squash, which you have the recipe. Oh, did I chop any apple up? No, I didn't. First of all, we have to deal with the squash. I have a very special knife that I saved just for things like squash and watermelon. I keep it in its original package. It does not go in the dishwasher. It is thoroughly cleaned after I use it, dried off, and put right back where I got it from. Mostly because I don't want my husband, cutting shoe leather with it or anything like that. So I hide this knife. It is technically a butcher knife, but where'd my squash go? But it works really good for cutting squash. Now this squash I got from the farmer's market. So you can use acorn squash. This is a buttercup squash. If you have a winter squash that you really like, that's what you want to use for this recipe. And this knife works perfectly for cutting up squash. Although I did give Marcy Narum a Blue Hubbard once, and she broke her good knife. If you can't get that squash cut open, what you want to do is you want to get a hammer and a screwdriver and poke a few holes in it, put in the microwave for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and that should soften it up enough to cut it in half for you. Because the first thing you want to do is bake the squash, and then we'll add the stuffing and bake it again. You see all these things, these little hacks on Facebook about how to do this or that, and most of them never work, because I try them. Believe me, I try them. This is one of those pumpkin scraper things that you get at Halloween, which I keep in my drawer, and they work perfect for scraping the guts out of all of my squash. So we're going to scrape this out. And I think if you have an acorn squash, you probably have 2 better cups. I see I cut this a little crooked, so I got 1 deep cup and 1 not so deep cup. Whoops, and I dropped it. There we go. You have to be like really strong to be a cook anymore, I think. Which is another thing that works for clean living, is kneading bread dough and wrestling squash. It's really good for your biceps. Okay, so we have them cleaned out. Like I said, this one will make a good cup. This one will probably be pumpkin pie when it's done. I'm going to put them on a foil-lined cookie sheet. I'm going to bust that stem off. On a side note, this is our composting bucket, which we Don't put anything in the garbage that is compostable. We take that out. Sometimes the animals get some of it. And we're going to put a little olive oil in there, a little olive oil in there. I love olive oil. Olive oil is a good oil for you to use. And we're going to just kind of rub that up a little bit. This will keep it from drying out a little too much while it's in the oven. And then this goes in. Excuse me. Oh, can I do this? I hope on my apron. This goes in the oven at 400 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. What you want to do is be able to poke that with a fork, so it'll be nice and tender. And then when it comes out of the oven, it looks like this. It's nice and soft, and it has a little bit of brown around here, which is the sugars in here are caramelizing. Squash is a yellow vegetable, which means it has tons of carotene in it, which means it has good nutrients. Let's see, is it carotene for your eyes? You know, carrots and squash and all that kind of stuff. Pumpkin, really good for you. And by the way, if you do this and you have extra squash, you can cook them like this too. Scrape it out, measure it out in 1 cup partitions, and save it for Thanksgiving for pumpkin pie, because as we know, Thanksgiving is coming right up. So, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to cut that apple up earlier. We're gonna quickly mix up our stuffing here. And one of the things with the recipe that I provided is that I usually cook with whatever I have in my refrigerator. So if you don't have an apple, you can leave the apple out. If you don't like mushrooms, you can leave the mushroom out. Squash and apple are a good combination here. And these tree apples, oh man, we had such an abundance of apples this year. It was so wonderful. All right, so we're not going to measure this, but feel free, okay? I'm going to recycle this so I don't have so many dishes to do. And we're going to throw the apple, the onion, about, you know, probably an onion about this big. This is enough for probably 4 people. Unless you eat like I do, then it's only enough for 2. We're going to throw the mushrooms in there. I am not going to put in the seasoning because I am not really sure what they spice this meat up with. It could very well be spicy, or it could be Italian spicy. But since it came from German Russian country, I'm thinking it's just spicy. Then we want to put our dried breadcrumbs in there. I usually dry them before I freeze them. That's a no-no there. And we got a big squash, so I'm putting a little extra crumbs in there. And then we're going to mix that up with our egg, which is the binder. So if you've done any kind of stuffing before, this will sound familiar. I'm gonna mix that all up. And then I'm going to, you know what? I think I'll put another glove on here. Gotta keep it clean. Up. All right, I reduced the heat on that bread, and I'm hoping that it'll be done at 4 o'clock while you're asking questions, or we're answering questions, and then you get to see it. Sorry, see it come out of there. All right, so we're going to add the pork sausage. You can add turkey sausage. You can add chicken sausage. If you want to make it more vegetarian, you wouldn't have to add the sausage at all. You could make a stuffing with onions and celery, all kinds of good things like that, and leave out the meat, put in extra mushrooms. I have a vegan stepdaughter, that I just love practicing cooking. So then we're going to just stuff that in the squash, and I have enough for 2 sides, but since I already have one baked, I'm only going to make 1 more, because guess what we're having for supper tonight? Now this goes in the oven for at least 30 minutes. You want to make sure that your sausage is thoroughly cooked. The best part is the meat of the squash will be nice and soft, and it so complimentary to the pork. It is absolutely a wonderful meal. And I'm sure you'll have somebody in your family that'll eat the guts and not eat the squash, but I would suggest they at least try it. Oh wait, we're gonna get rid of the messy glove there. Okay, here we go in the oven. Let's see, we're going to. I made extra squash so I can make pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. I'm still excited. All right. Now our bread is in there at 375. So if I can find room in there. I stuck the squash in there to cook at the same time. So that way you've got time to do something else. Have a cup of coffee maybe. Let's talk a little bit about, well, we have a little bit of time. We'll talk a little bit more about the whole concept of clean eating. There's a book by Mark Bittman. I couldn't find it. I know it's laying around here somewhere, that actually is called Clean Food. Like I said, you can go onto the Mayo website. They actually have a list of foods in there, and they tell you why it's so good to be eating like this. My sister-in-law eats like this. You're just getting back to basics. You're basically just kind of getting back to the kind of food that my ancestors ate when they came over here, albeit not maybe the first couple of years, because it was kind of tough without trees in this state. One of the things you want to do is think outside the box. Anything that comes in a box that has preservatives in it is probably a little less healthy than if it was more in its truer self. And so if you were going to make a comparison, you could compare a fresh fig to a fig Newton. One of them is right there, the way God intended it to be. And the other one, of course, has, well, it's wrapped in good stuff because I really like fig Newtons. Once again, read your labels. You want to always read what's in your food that you're eating. It's easy to kind of get caught up in how busy we are. Like we are so busy all the time. My kids are so busy, I hardly get to see them some weeks. What you got to do is you kind of like think ahead, plan ahead a little bit. If you've got weekends free and you love to cook, you can make 3 or 4 big meals, split them up, and then you've got food for a week or two. Rather than getting together and having a paint party with your friends and your kids, you could get your friends together and you could do like a big cooking day. It's something that my mom used to do with her best friend, Gladys. And that's how I learned everything that I know about getting around the kitchen. Is rather than watching cartoons, I would actually sit in the kitchen and I would listen to them jabber, jabber, jabber. Of course, sometimes I only got half the story, and that makes for some really good tall tales in my own mind. But I watched them, and they had such joy in creating food together and talking and having coffee, and it was really great. Some of the things that you want to watch for in your foods are trans fats. I'm sure you've heard that before. Hydrogenated vegetable oil or partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, things that are in crackers, cookies. Oh my gosh, I had to give up microwave popcorn. But we bought a Stir Crazy instead, and it works just as good. And the popcorn is delicious. We use coconut oil so that we're not getting any kind of bad fats while we're eating popcorn. And as much as I would like to put butter on it, somebody in our house doesn't like buttered popcorn, so we have to eat it plain. It's fine. But you want to watch for those kinds of things. Trans fat, high fructose corn syrup. That is something that is confused with regular corn syrup. They are not the same. There is something about the way that high fructose corn syrup reacts with your body so that your body never feels full. The more nutritious and the more nutrient dense foods you start to eat, like roasted carrots or roasted potatoes with a little olive oil and salt and pepper on, rather than eating French fries and stuff like that, you will see the difference in how full you feel from eating foods that are actually cleaner than not. And also anything artificially colored. You know, we have to watch one of the grandkids because there's a red dye that just makes her go into orbit. And so she's not allowed to have anything that's red. So you want to look for, and you know, why would you have to do that? You know, I always think, why would you have to take something out of a food and then put it back in again? You know, I can't think of a good example right at the moment, but they do a lot of that. Artificial sweeteners, I can taste an artificial sweetener miles and miles away. I don't like the taste of them, which is why I do not drink any kind of soda. I haven't since about 1972. And so if you do the math, you'll know how old I am. But if I don't look in the mirror, I never know. So shop a little smarter. I always buy things in bulk, and you're like, oh, what can I do with, you know, 5 pounds of pumpkin seeds? Well, if you have friends, you could start like a little co-op thing where you get together and you put in an order, it as your standard, and you buy things in 5 pounds and you each take 1 pound home and split the cost. It's a reasonable way to get really good organic food. I think the food co-op and maybe a few of the grocery stores around here actually have bulk products that are available too, that you can just buy just what you need for the day. It's not in a package. Remember, the package, it's not the package, it's the packaging that you have to watch out for. We eat a lot of whole grains like oatmeal. I grind my own wheat flour when I make bread with wheat flour in it, and I eat at home a lot. I know that during COVID, people were forced into eating at home, but I think that there's some people that actually started enjoying that a lot. It's kind of like a slow food movement. You know, like let's say you're working and you get up in the morning, you took a roast beef out of your freezer the night before, put that sucker in the crock pot with some onion soup and a little water, go to work, come home, throw in some potatoes and carrots, give it another hour of cooking, and you've got a nice hot meal for your family. It's not that difficult, but you do have to think a little bit. And then of course, experiment. Like I said, if you don't like one ingredient in a recipe, there are many, many substitutes. All you have to do is Google it. You know, when I'm out of something out here, I live out of town far enough to where I just sort of like Google it. And I'm like, oh, this works for me. So quickly, it's almost time to check the oven. Fresh fruit, you would all understand that. Fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. I love roasted vegetables. Whenever they have things on sale around the perimeter of the store, that's usually where I start my grocery shopping. When I was a young mother, I had a very limited budget, and we always ate everything that was on sale. And usually the fresher, the better. So vegetables, there's all kinds of wonderful vegetables out there. There's easy ways to prepare things. When I started working in local foods, probably about 2010 or so, I was astonished to find out that there were people that didn't know how easy it was to make mashed potatoes, of which we eat quite a few. Lean meats, you can always find good lean quality meats at the grocery store. If you can't or don't have room to buy a beef or chicken or a hog like we're going to get in January, I'm very excited about that. Lots of whole grains and dairy products. We eat a lot of cottage cheese, we eat a lot of yogurt, and we drink regular milk. I love almond milk, but I like regular milk better for cooking, you know, because the almond milk will give you like a little bit of flavor that you don't want. Seeds and nuts, that's what we snack on during the day. We root cellar the things from our garden, which I would highly recommend if you do not shop at farmers markets, that you start shopping at farmers markets. Not only will you find the freshest fruits and vegetables in the state, maybe not all of them, because we don't grow bananas or avocados here, which that sucks, but maybe someday. But go to the farmer's market. The vendors there not only grow this stuff, we eat the stuff, and we can give you recipes. We can tell you how to prepare things. You can always try something new, like we try to grow things that are a little bit different now and then go home and start cooking. Doesn't have to be all done in a day either. You can start out slowly, eating a few more fresh fruits and vegetables. You can eat more roasted vegetables as opposed to, well, the order is fresh vegetables like fresh green beans, then frozen green beans would be the next nutritious beans, and then the canned green beans would be the last. And when I was single and living by myself in this crummy little apartment, I would just eat a can of beans for supper. So I've been there. I know it's difficult when you have kids, but you just have to like think ahead a little bit, and then eventually it will really grow on you, because fresh fruit is just so much better than the canned stuff. Fresh vegetables are so much better than the canned stuff. And fresh bread, of course, is the best. I do realize that even some people in my own family won't eat bread anymore, but my ancestors would have died without all of the bread. And I started making sourdough bread, which is a fermented bread, because I did research on a book, and those women had something called everlasting yeast, which was basically a sourdough. And all of them talked about how they drew straws to see who would be the one to go down in the root cellar and get the yeast up to make the bread every week, because the root cellar, of course, is under the frost line. And not only is there fruits and vegetables and potatoes and cantaloupe and all that stuff they stored over the winter, there was also little salamanders and spiders and things like that crawling around. So we have a root cellar, but it's not got dirt walls. I love my root cellar. Okay, so we're going to let the bread stay in the oven for a few minutes, but I'll show you what our squash looks like. This time-lapse photography trick I'm trying here. Ooh, wee doggy. We have the perfect plate. When it's done, you can put some Parmesan cheese on the top of it and put it back in the oven if you want. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have showed it to you first. And like I said, when you eat it, you want to eat the squash and the stuffing at the same time. Oh man, that smells so good. The minute you guys are gone, this is going to be mine. I tell you, mine. So we're going to set that there. Are there any questions that I can answer at the moment there, Doreen?
Hey, Sue, this looks amazing. You're doing some good stuff there. This is really cool. Hey, I got to ask you about that big whisk you've got there. That is one whisk that I think is amazing.
This thing here, it's actually a bread whisk. It's
Oh,
made specifically for mixing up bread dough or Coogan dough, anything like that. And I love this thing. And I think they're probably I think they're only like about 10 bucks on Amazon. This was a good investment, let me tell you.
I love that. That's one tool we don't have at our house, and I think we need one of those. So very cool. So that was my question for you about that. We're going to encourage all of you to put your questions in the chat here. But another one I have is, what was the name of that nourishing book that you talked about first? Nourishing
Traditions.
Tradition. Okay.
Yes, it's written by Sally Fallon. She's a local food, fresh food, clean food activist, I'd say. So you have to take her maybe with a grain of salt. It isn't easy to change the way you eat. You know, that is like a huge thing. But you know, times are changing. Things are changing. Even our season is changing, where we can actually start growing more longer into the fall, earlier in the spring. Gardening is another just huge passion in my life. And I don't know what I would do. Like sometimes I actually shop my garden, you know, like, oh, what you got for supper tonight? Well, I think I'll go see what's out in the garden. It's so much fun, you guys.
Oh, that's great. I grew squash for the first time this year, and we've got lots of squash, so I am definitely going to try this recipe for sure. I love this idea. That sounds really
I was gonna say, one of the things when we're teaching gardening classes is do not plant the whole packet of zucchini or squash. You know, think carefully about this. We've had people like, this must have been a good year for squash. Like we had trailers full of squash at the farmer's market. But the good thing is that if you cure it properly, it will last you till Easter. We usually have carrots, onions, garlic, squash at Easter time, because if it's stored properly, then you can eat local all winter long.
Oh, that's awesome. I tell you what, we had the best tomato year this year. It was like from July through, we just got done eating fresh tomatoes like last week. So
And there's nothing like it. I don't buy any tomatoes from the grocery store. I just can't. Because if you grow your own, you know that there's nothing better than a fresh tomato.
yeah. Hey, we've got a question here about you're saving your squash for pumpkin pie. Is that completely interchangeable to use the squash to make the pumpkin pie?
Secret number 2, you're probably getting blue Hubbard squash in Libby's pumpkin pie can. So yes, actually squashes that got probably, if you're not using the right pumpkin, squash is a much better substitute. The flavor is divine. So definitely, I grow these big blue Hubbards. They look like alien eggs. And those are the best for pumpkin pie, but I would guarantee that there is some squash mixed in with Libby's too.
Look at the big jar of yeast you have. You do make a lot of bread, don't you? My goodness.
You know
I
what?
have these little tiny packets and I have to look at the expiration date to make sure they're still okay when I use them.
2 things. Number 1 is Costco sells Fleischmann's yeast by the 1 or 5 pound packages. You can buy that, put it in your freezer. The cost of that package is equal to those little jars, those little brown jars of yeast. So it's so much more economical. And like I said, if you can't use all these stuff in bulk, by all means, find a friend to share it with.
Sure.
I use instant yeast. I do buy it by the 5 pound. I buy everything by the 5 or 25 pound bags, because I do bake for the farmers market. So, and then keep it in the freezer. Next, if you don't know if your yeast is going to work for you or not, you take a little warm water, and by warm, lukewarm water, I'm talking about baby bottle warm, you know, run the water over your wrist. And if it feels like a baby bottle warm, then you want to take, you know, half a cup of water, put a teaspoon of yeast in there and a teaspoon of sugar, stir it up. And in 15 minutes, if it doesn't start foaming, you know, it'll start acting, then it's not good anymore. But I have actually that yeast there, its expiration date is November 1st, 2022. And I will continue to use that until it's all gone, because those expiration dates are for grocery stores, not necessarily for you. So even when you buy something, like I said, we've been known to cut the mold off our bread. It's not going to kill you. It doesn't taste good, but we cut it off the sheets too. So
you said you use instant. You don't use active dry at all. You use instant yeast.
And the difference between the 2 yeasts is you can dump the instant yeast right into your recipe, but the other stuff, the Fleischmann's, you need to proof that first. Like I said, it'll tell you in each recipe that you take a half cup of warm water and a teaspoon or 2 of yeast, or a package of yeast, which is 2 1/4 teaspoons. And then you put a little sugar in there and kind of let it proof. And then once that is starting to, you know, well, I think I'm not sure what the proper term is for it to start, but I always say my culture farts, and then that gets air bubbles in it. So that's what it's doing. And then you put that into your recipe. So that's the only difference between using the regular yeast and the instant yeast.
Okay. Hey, and we have a question here. How do you store carrots and onions so that they last through the winter?
Definitely not together. Big mistake. Onions will cause things to sprout. Like your potatoes and onions in your house should be totally kept separate.
Really?
Yes, that's what will cause your potatoes to spoil. And oh my gosh, if you've ever smelled that smell, the smell of rotten potatoes is not anything, you know. So what you want to do, like what we do with our carrots, is we cut the tops of our carrots when we're growing them. I don't know if she grows her own carrots. I leave about that much green on them. You take them out of the ground and you let them sit outside on the ground to kind of like dry off, which what you're doing is you're kind of letting them create a tougher skin. And then I put them in big 2-gallon bags with a couple of paper towels, leave them open, put them in the refrigerator. And I'm not kidding. I got about 3 or 4 2-gallon bags of carrots in my refrigerator. We will eat those all winter long, and they are great. We never have to peel them. We just use a vegetable brush on them, but do not store them. Your onions should be up in your basket or hanging from the rafters in a mesh bag away from everything else. One of the secrets to root cellaring properly is to actually go down and check that stuff once in a while. Onions you can keep in the refrigerator. We do have a second refrigerator in our root cellar that we keep potatoes in, so they don't sprout. And I know people are like, you can't put your potatoes in the refrigerator, but you can. And then you let them come to room temperature before you use them, and they're just perfect. But take the bad ones out. Every once in a while, one of those little varmints dug a hole in your apple or bit off of your squash or potato, and that will cause it to go bad faster. And if you get that out of there, it won't cause the other stuff to go bad. And another thing is, don't wash those carrots or those potatoes or those squash or those apples before you store them. Water is the one thing that promotes the decay faster than anything. I'm gonna check my bread, see if you got another question.
Okay, we do. We have one about using glass pans versus metal bread pans. And is metal okay to use for this kind of bread?
Ooh, look at that. Look at
Beautiful.
Okay, in the oven with that one.
That's beautiful. I really think it's smelling good over at your place right about now, I'm sure. And oh, look at that.
I am honestly not sure why this particular recipe works better in glass. I do use a lot of, now this is that same bread recipe, but it has 1.5 cups of toasted walnuts in it.
Oh,
can you smell it? Oh my gosh.
I'm trying to, I really am. I think I am.
So while I would use a regular pan you could try this in a regular pan. I don't see why it wouldn't work. I have wonderful nonstick loaf pans, but I love the shape of this. And the fact that you have to bake it in you're supposed to bake it in 2 1-quart pots instead of the big one, but it works like this. Now, here's something that people, like, I got butter right here. Don't cut your bread when it's hot. It's not done yet. You need to let it completely cool off. Some of my sourdough I'll actually leave overnight before I'll put it in a bag. Putting it in plastic will cause it to go bad faster. So if you haven't cut your bread, you can let it lay on the counter for a long time. Well, not a long time, but at least overnight. So I will cool this off before I cut it, because otherwise it's not through baking in there yet. And does it sound hollow? Yeah, I'll make a nice drum. Oh, I can't. Ooh.
Oh.
Remember, you cannot put too much butter in that pan. These bowls that I just got, I went out in search of bowls shaped like this. You can't find these great mixing bowls like this, and you can't find just one of them. So I had to buy a set of this is I think it is Anchor Hocking. They were like 25 bucks, and I got covers to go with these. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bowls and 5 covers. It was like $24 or something. These are so wonderful and heavy duty. Now the gal in the book, which I love this book. Like, I'm pretty picky about books, but this book has been absolutely amazing. And this woman actually uses antique Pyrex bowls when she bakes her bread like this. See the shape of the bread right there? But this is great because, like I said, she's got recipes in here for French toast and all kinds of croutons and pizza dough and all kinds of things that you can make out of the leftover bread that you don't eat. Because I bake often enough that we always have a half a loaf here and a half a loaf there. And one of the things about doing this yourself, my friends, is you will never eat day-old bread again if you can eat it when you just pull it out of the oven like that. So I'm pretty picky about what I put in my mouth. And that's why I do this. I love to eat and I love good food. And so that's why I have over the years kind of worked at it. So
yeah. Oh, I'm with you. And you talk about eating at home, and I tell you what, it's since COVID too, I'm fortunate my husband likes to cook and he's a really good cook. I always say we have better meals at home than when we go out sometimes.
You're guaranteed a better meal at home than when you go out, because it's a crapshoot out there anymore, isn't it?
Oh, Sue, this has been so much fun. We're out of our questions right now. Any last comments from you or anything else we need to cover on your end there in the kitchen?
No, I'm going to finish baking my bread. I'm going to freeze my extra squash. I'm going to eat when you guys aren't looking at me anymore. Just remember that, like I said earlier, this is not something that you can just like one day start. But if you're, growing a little older, you can certainly benefit from eating better foods, more nutrient dense foods. And I would so recommend starting to shop with your local farmers markets. It's not only fun, but it is educational also.
For sure. And you just feel better too when you eat better.
When you get older, your body can't absorb nutrients the same way when it does when you're younger. And I'm not really good at swallowing pills. Like I have this thing my mom had about these great big capsules. And so I'd rather eat my nutrients than take a pill. So
good point. Good point. This has been so much fun, Sue. We got to do this again sometime.
I got a ton of things to say about food, so don't hesitate to talk to me again.
Yeah, next time I'm coming out to your kitchen is what I'm doing. So, but thank you again, Sue. It's been great fun to have you here today.